and consequently, it does become a burden. It requires many, many hours. But the courts have been clear now, and it's gone to the Supreme Court, so that is the law of the land. Mm-hmm. Is free, a copy is not. Mm-hmm. So what happened recently? The Attorney General's office put out a protocol that said that if you decide you want to inspect something, and we prepare those documents, and then you take a picture of it with your phone, that they were going to be charged.
And the Attorney General's office, in that protocol, basically is coming at the same. They're not disputing that the records themselves are not public. What they're disputing is how you should be able to charge to have access to those. And what's interesting about that is that you have two arms, and by the way, for all of you watching, the media came down on the same side as Secretary Condos, the ACLU, the New England First Amendment Coalition, the governor's office. The Attorney General at the moment is kind of out on a limb by himself on this one. And contrary to kind of all of the discussion, nobody's at loggerheads. Nobody's butting heads over this. It's just a philosophical difference in the interpretation of who should pony up the money. Because TJ's office, TJ Donovan, the Attorney General, his office is saying, as you pointed out, there's a tremendous amount of cost and effort that goes into producing.
You know, I can see where he's coming from, but I don't think that the Supreme Court case actually really went in that direction. Mm-hmm. So TJ and I have talked about this, and I know he's going to go to the legislature to ask for clarification. Mm-hmm. I think the clarification should be relatively easy because the courts have ruled on it. But you know, we'll have that discussion. Mm-hmm. We'll have that discussion.
Another interesting little nuance here is that the Attorney General's office is the counsel for state agencies.
Correct.
Including your office. And yet you had to file an amicus brief in this case. You couldn't use the Attorney General's office, so did you have to go out and get somebody else to do that work for you?
I did. It was, I think what really happened was that the Attorney General's office wasn't sure where they were going to come down on this case, mm-hmm. And they were considering their own amicus, perhaps on the side of the Burlington Police. Mm-hmm. In the end, they did not. Mm-hmm. But we found a lawyer, an attorney in town that would do the work for us. Obviously, we helped edit, but we submitted what I like to call a 30,000-foot view. We didn't get into the specifics of the Reed Doyle case. Mm-hmm. What we did was we said, look, here's what the law says. Mm-hmm. So we tried to stay at a very high level. Mm-hmm. And that's, my office generally tries to stay at a high level. We try to just go, here's what the law says, here's what we believe that law is saying, mm-hmm. And work from that.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to pivot a little bit. Same topic. And you mentioned it earlier, there are a lot of exemptions. There's too many exemptions as far as, from my point of view, there are too many exemptions on public records. And I point a finger at Jim Douglas on a lot of that. But a lot of the governors have done the same, and they've made it more difficult. But I think it needs to be clear that and people who are watching this not all people watching this understand that it's a public records request, which means that any person, anybody from the public can make these requests. And there are people who make a lot of requests, and there are a lot of people who tie up your staff, the staffs of other agencies around the state. At what point does it become where it feels frivolous and it needs to be kind of addressed? And this puts you on the spot because I'm the guy who's going to say there is no limit, but maybe you're the guy who says that too.
I actually agree with you. I believe, in fact, I have said often to my staff that regardless of who it is, Why they're asking, that's not our job to determine. Our job is to fill that request, and that's the role that we will take. In fact, there is another Burlington Supreme Court decision, and I don't remember which one. I actually have it in my transparency tour paperwork, but there is another decision that says that the agency, the government, cannot ask who or why you want this information. That it's basically agnostic to it, and I agree with that. I mean, you know, yes, we have some frequent flyers out there who will keep us very busy, keep us on our toes. But my job is to provide that information as long as it meets the law. And you're right, there are too many exemptions. I believe that. I know the legislature has worked to reduce them, but every year additional ones get thrown in there. So right now, if you look at the statute in Title I, which is where the public records access language is, there's about 40 exemptions there. But scattered throughout the state statutes are other statements, are other exemptions that are put into a section, a specific section of the law. We estimate there's around 260.
Yep, I've heard 250. So yep.
So, but the good news is that there is the Legislative Council has a website where you can go to look at those exemptions, and you can say, I want to look at animal information or animal records, and it'll pull up it'll do a search and pull up those records that deal with animals or medical information and whatever. And we also have one on our website, on the State Archives website, that allows the public to look at all these exemptions. It was a lot of work putting it all together. And we often will get, at the end of a session, some of our staff and some of the Ledge Council staff will actually go through the bills that have passed. Oh, here's something that acts as a exemption, therefore we got to highlight that. So, and that happens. But there's a lot of it are legitimate exemptions. But I think there's also a lot of duplication, and I think we could actually shorten it up a little bit. The federal government, as you probably know, did that a few years ago. They had reams of exemptions, and they're down to like a dozen in general. And I think that's the approach that we need to take at some point. I know there was a committee that looked at it over a 3-year period. They did reduce some of them, or they combined some of them, but I think there's more that could be done.
So public records are under your purview. As Secretary of State, you have really taken this to a different level, though, as far as making sure that the public understands and public officials understand not just what they need to know about records, but what they need to know about process in their towns, in accountability, responsibility, and you yourself served on the South Burlington City Council for quite some time.
18 years.
18 years, and kind of saw it all there. I mean, you and I have talked at other times about kind of some of the things that you've seen, and now you are kind of the gatekeeper for a lot of towns in determining, well, can we do that? Can't we do that? And rather than doing it kind of piecemeal, which happens probably all the time, you are setting out again. This is how many? 5th year?
Well, it would be the fifth official year of the Transparency Tour.
Yeah. You're doing what's called a Transparency Tour, where you actually go out to the community and you go to towns, communities, and invite other communities nearby to come in and essentially get a refresher on how to do this. It's not mandatory. You wish it were.
I do.
I wish it were too. But what exactly is the Transparency Tour? What are you aiming to do?
Education.
Yep.
And that's the big thing, and we've really consolidated or shortened it up into a pretty brief presentation as such. It's about the total presentation is about an hour and a half, maybe an hour and 15 minutes, but it depends on the questions that we get, and then we get at the end we get a lot more questions. But we basically divide it into two sections. One is to talk about the open meeting law. The other is to talk about public records access. As you can probably imagine, a lot of our effort or a lot of our focus is on the open meeting law. Yep. That's where we seem to have the most questions.
Yep.
But we travel the whole state. We usually do it in the off year from the election, so the odd year, the odd numbered year, and that's this year. And we're starting it, I believe, if not next week, the week after, and we'll do it for about a 6-week period. And we have done so far in the previous years, we've visited well over 50 communities. We'll go if a town specifically asks for us. Like we had one town that had been sued by some residents, and the judge said, well, you need to have, one of the conditions that he placed on them was to have that town go through two presentations on open meeting law. Mm-hmm. So we were one, VLCT did another. We worked, the original was with VLCT and Steve Jeffrey, and he went with us on these things, and literally we go from Franklin County to Windham County, from Bennington County to Essex Orleans counties, and I mean we go through the whole state, and I think the most people we ever had was up in St. Johnsbury a few years ago, and
well, there was a lot going on in St. Johnsbury at that time.
There was. We had over 150 people show up, and we've done it for as few as 3 or 4. So, we don't really care how many. We like to have more people. We generally will notify the town manager or town administrator, the select boards, planning commissioners, and any other. We ask the town clerks to notify their various boards, like the cemetery board and whatever, that we're coming to town, and neighboring towns, and we usually send out, obviously we've sent it to you already, but we will follow up as each week with those towns that we're going to that following week, right. To try to drum up as much support as we can. It's a pretty informal thing, and to be honest with you, I enjoy doing it. It's really about education. It's not playing gotcha. Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll go back to that. So everybody knows you can expect an editorial from me in the next few days, because every time you do one of these, I come out saying, thank you, Secretary Condos, for doing these, because it only makes our job and has the eyes and ears of the public easier, because everyone's sitting up a little straighter and going by the book, and they're doing, when they do their job as intended, it makes it easier for the public to be able to get information and understand the decisions.
And it's so important.
Yeah.
The public has a right to know and a right to participate, right. And that's the point that we try to make this nice and simple, and again as an educational piece.
So when you say, when I ask you initially why, and you say education, what do you mean? Because when we talk about open meeting laws, I know what you're talking about, but the public may not necessarily understand why it is so important for these boards to get the primer. It's not necessarily a primer on Robert's rules and all of those pieces of it. It's important because there are certain processes that are mandated by statute that have to be done. And so what kinds of things are we talking about?
So if you're going to have your regular meeting, if you meet let's say the first Monday of each month at 7 p.m. at Town Hall, that's a regular meeting, and typically you've passed a resolution at your first meeting that says this is when we're going to meet. Mm-hmm. Regular meetings are supposed to be warned and noticed. Your agenda's posted 48 hours ahead of time, so the public has a right to see what's going to be on that agenda.
And and what is a warning?
Well, let me go back a little bit, because the warning, basically, it's just announcing that the meeting is happening.
Right.
And it has to be posted in a couple places. If the town maintains a website, they have to post it on their website ahead of time. If it's a special meeting, so if any one of the factors, if it's not going to be on the regular day, or the regular hour, or the regular meeting place, if any one of those three changes, it's called a special meeting, and you only have to notice that 24 hours ahead of time. So it's really about, again, to get the public out to know what's going on. You know, we've also made some changes over the last 8 or 9 years. For instance, they're supposed to hold allow the public a public comment period. Typically, it's for comments for items that are not on the agenda. One of the first things that a public body is supposed to do is ask if there's anything that on the agenda that needs to be changed. Are we deleting something? Are we adding something? I always tell people when you're adding something, it should be for information purposes only. If you're going to take an action, it should be on your next warned meeting so that the public can be notified that you're going to take an action on something. The reason is you could get some hanky-panky going on where a board says, well, this is a controversial issue, we'll just go to the meeting and see who's going to show up, and if it looks okay, we'll add it to our agenda. We don't want that to happen.
Right.
The public has a right to know, and the public has a right to attend, and the public has a right to participate. Things like minutes. The law has been in place for over 30 years that says that the minutes are supposed to be ready for someone to look at within 5 days. It doesn't say final draft. It doesn't say draft or final minutes or approved minutes. It just says minutes have to be ready. It's pretty minimal what you have to have in your minutes. It has to have, obviously, the meeting, when it is. It has to say these are the agenda items. It has to say who attended from the board at that meeting, and if there were anybody there from the public. They don't have to necessarily identify everybody. I always use this as an example. When I was city council chair in South Burlington, we had a situation where we would hold a public hearing to go over our budget. Now, in South Burlington, let's just say we had a $10 million operating budget. We'd have 2 people show up.
Right.
Very little comment. The following week, we're going to discuss the leash law and our bicycle path. 150 people show up, and everybody wants to say something. So that's the kind of thing that you got to balance, but you got to allow the public the opportunity to speak. You got to give them a reasonable opportunity. Those minutes are now required. If you have a website, you're supposed to have those minutes posted on the website within the 5 days or after the 5 days. That raised a lot of consternation among towns because they were saying that it was problematic for them, a burden to have to post those minutes. And our argument, and what the legislature ultimately agreed with, was that part of the law hasn't really changed. It's just that if you have a website, it's got to be posted on the website.
Right.
And in the old days, it might have been difficult to, you have to let it load up. I remember with AOL, it would take 5 minutes, 10 minutes to load something up and get it posted. Now it's just point, click, and it's done.
Right.
So it's relatively easy, and it's just kind of basic procedures that you have to follow.
Yeah. Well, and we're almost out of time. It all comes down to accountability, right?
It really is.
And that's what you're doing. Is these are elected officials, they're laymen in most cases, and while they love to do it, there are rules you got to follow. And
that's right.
The media appreciates it. I know the public appreciates it. So, my guest has been Jim Kondo, Secretary of State of the state of Vermont. Jim, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We covered a lot of information in a short amount of time.
We did.
All right. And thank you for watching. Until next time, see you around.
Christina Naylor is being a mom for once. Besides, she will be back before the end of this meeting and before we have the turf discussion. The first orders of business are a revised agenda. We're rearranging specifically because Christina wished to participate in the turf discussion. We are moving 9A policies to 8A unfinished business so that all policy and adoption and discussion occurs at the same time. We are moving 9C leadership council between 8A and 8B since this is unfinished business. We're moving item 9, a personnel matter. It will not be an executive session. However, we will be adding 2 other executive sessions later in the meeting. 9M, appointment of, we're adding a line item, and 9M, to appoint a spokesperson to speak with media. And I believe that we should have some student council attendees, and I would love, thank you very much for coming. Your presence is always a joy.
Thank you for having us.
Great. Okay, now I have to go back to the real agenda, so please do bear with me, because I'm flipping back between pages and I have vision issues. First order of business would be, and if anyone who catches me making a mistake, please go ahead and correct me. We have the clerk's report, and I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
I would move that we approve the minutes of October 16th and October 23rd.
Do we have a second?
I second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Oh, this is going quickly.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, the ayes have it. The minutes are approved. I'd like to welcome everybody who came out to talk to us this evening. Please do sign in. I'm not sure where the list went, but the law requires us to record all attendees. Bathrooms are downstairs, which is a quick and important thing. We will take public comment before taking any action from any WSCSD resident, student, staff member, or anyone directly affected by the agenda. Please wait to be recognized by the chair, direct your comments to the chair, and avoid any personal attacks. I've been insulted 5 times today, and my patience is about this thick. Comment time is 2 minutes. Additional time will be granted if required. And at the end of the meeting, we will take comment for any non-agenda items. Has everyone received the many communications that Christina sent around? Okay. Are there any additional communications anyone needs to share with us?
So generally I don't at this point, but I did just receive a communication on the turf field from the Windham County NAACP and asked to share it with you this evening. Is now the time to do
Now's a
that?
great time, sure.
And I apologize, I just got this. Normally I would have sent it to you all ahead of time. Dear WSESD members, the National NAACP has taken a strong stance concerning climate justice and seeks to ensure that it does its part to fight the impact of climate change and its effect on our communities. Thus, as the branch representing Windham County, Vermont, we feel the need to provide sharp commentary on these matters. It has come to our attention that you are considering a proposal to replace the grass football field with a synthetic turf football field at the Brattleboro Union High School. We want you to know that we are vehemently opposed to the construction of this synthetic turf field. The creation of this field is not only costly, but it is also, as pointed out in the letter from concerned community members, potentially dangerous to all students due to the emittance of harmful chemicals. Since the letter from community members so eloquently addresses the potential harm to both the climate and our youth that drives from the construction of this field, we do not feel the need to restate their points. Instead, we would like to to pose a few questions that we hope spark a meaningful conversation around equity. Question 1, if this field turns out to be as harmful as data suggests, what groups of students do you believe would be most impacted? Question 2, if students are impacted, do you feel their families could afford to pay healthcare costs? Question 3, do you plan to consult members from historically marginalized communities, i.e. low socioeconomic, racial minorities, disabled, etc., before making your decision? Question 4, how does the construction of this field align the values around equity and justice the WSESD espouses? Thank you, Stefan Gillen, the Windham County NAACP.
Thank you, Ed. Do we have any other communications?
You should send it to me electronically, and I will send it on to you.
Okay, I will do that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question?
You may.
Do these communications get posted on the web?
I believe that they do. If they haven't been, then that can certainly be done.
And where would I find it? I'm not very good at going around the web.
Jim, no. It should be attached to our minutes or agenda on the WSCSD page, but don't hold me to that because I'm not entirely sure. But if they're not there, I will personally see to it that they are, or you can go somewhere and look at them otherwise.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so where are we? Committee reports. Now I can go back to the other page, and we will begin with finance.
Finance Subcommittee of the WSESD met this evening at 5 till 6 o'clock, and we approved the warrants. We didn't approve, we went over the warrants and payrolls. That approval will come later in this meeting. And then we had a discussion about the turf field improvement project. There was input from administration and central office and members of the public and members of the subcommittee, the financial subcommittee. And our last agenda item was budget planning timeline. But we kind of ran out of time, so we'll take that up at another meeting. That's about it.
Well, while you've got you there, how about the Personnel Committee? This is literally another type thing.
Yes, thank you very much. The Personnel Committee actually has not met since our last meeting, and we did report at the last meeting our first and only meeting so far. Oh, no.
Kelly's the chair.
Yes. Oh,
That's
thank
right,
you.
I completely
Thank you.
forgot because he was the
Thank you.
coordinator of getting it started. I apologize, Kelly.
Mistake. Yes, I'm sorry, Kelly.
So the committee moved to authorize the superintendent and the business manager of the WSESU to negotiate classified and certified contracts with personnel on behalf of the board.
Now, do we have to move that formally later in the meeting, or, okay, shall we do it now? Shall we take that as a motion, Kelly?
Sure.
Okay,
Second.
thank you.
I'm
Any,
sorry, can you read them? I didn't catch the motion. What's the motion?
To authorize the superintendent and the business manager of the WSESU to negotiate classified and certified contracts on behalf of the board.
thank you. Is there any discussion? So, we're all fine with this, or? Sure, Jody?
Just a question. Does any of the board members get to be part of this negotiation, or is it strictly the administration that's doing the negotiation? I'm an old timer, so please let me know.
They will do the negotiating. If we need to be brought in, we will be brought in at a later date. And I'm sorry, if you have a question, please announce your name and your town.
Jody Normando, Dummerston.
Thank you, Jody. So, is there any further discussion? Yes.
Henry Zucchini, Brownsboro. Are we to assume that Lyle and Frank will be the only two negotiators for on behalf of the board, or are there other negotiators? Point of clarification.
They will be as they have been if passed, the only negotiators, but it will be brought before the Personnel Committee and, of course, the entire board before we ratify any kind of contract. Anyone else? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Hearing none, the ayes have it, and our negotiating team has been established. Christina is not here for the Policy and Amendment Committee. Dave, would you be willing to?
Oh gosh, there are a lot of policies. We finished, well, there's a vote coming up on November 19th, I hope everyone knows, and there are 4 articles, and they are designed to balance the concerns of the towns regarding the whole unified or the whole merged board. And one of them adds 2 additional board members so that we have 10, so that we have someone who will be able to sit on leadership council in each of the 10 schools. And those 2 will come from Brattleboro to help deal with the underrepresentation of Brattleboro being 6 times larger than the other towns. And the smaller town issue concerns about big old Brattleboro closing their schools or removing grades or removing parts of grades and just sort of withering away at the schools are addressed in 2 other amendments that basically say that the towns have to decide to close their own. They can't be forced on it. They get to decide to close their own schools. And the 4th one, which actually I think is the first one, is leadership councils. It's to make that an amendment so that no board can change it. It would have to be changed by the entire community to get rid of leadership councils, which would be in each school made up of the principal, teachers selected by the teachers, parents and community members selected by them, and volunteers that want to serve. And where appropriate, where the students are old enough, have the students on those boards as well. There are other policies we're going to vote on tonight, so I think, so I'll leave those aside.
Yes, they are.
And
I think Tim's review was just the ones you discussed, not the ones that are coming up to be reviewed in general.
Right. So I'm not sure what else you can say about that. You have anything to add? You were there.
I do not have anything to add. Tara.
Hi, Tara Castine. I want to take this moment just to, I sent a few emails, so I'm sure you've all seen them. On the last board meeting, I asked, in the warranted meeting notes, it was addressed that you would be voting on a 4-2-2-2 configuration of the board. I had asked specifically when the vote took place, and I was told that if I looked for the vote, I would find it, which unfortunately, the only vote that you all placed for 4-2-2-2 was the warranting of that meeting. And the official vote for 4-2-2-2 of this board was never presented, voted, or commented on by the public. And I understand at this point in time it's warranted, so therefore that was your vote. But I'm, just as a Putney resident, kind of, I guess upset or not, just that there was no discussion, there was no, I couldn't see where each one of you voted in this thing. It was commented on 10-2 that the committee would bring forth a recommendation, and then on 10-16, which was the next meeting, it was just voted on as part of the warranting of the meeting, or the vote to happen within our towns. And I'm not really sure how to fix or how this is going to get fixed, but other than how, I don't, that's all I wanted to say, is that it was never officially voted on as part of its own discussion of this board, and I'm just upset as a town, a Putney resident, that we didn't have a chance to comment or to get all the options that were presented from the lawyer to the group.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion?
Is there a response to that comment?
The response, yeah, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, could you identify
Yes,
yourself?
Elizabeth Bissell, Putney, Vermont.
The answer would best be left to Christina, but we had a straw poll And then we went back to the lawyer with the results of the straw poll, and this was the best compromise we were able to come up with, but we were basing it on what was a very informal vote
And the straw poll was,
among board members.
and the straw poll
Revealed a strong preference for no strong preference. Like, it was really, there were very few positions that had more votes than other positions. There we go. I'm trying to find words for it.
I'd just add one thing. If we talked about this in the Policy and Amendments Committee for months, over and over and over, and we talked about it a lot in the board. When it came to the board, we just, as you said, we voted on the package of amendments. But it wasn't to keep from having that conversation. We just didn't think to do that.
Well,
And since obviously it matters, so I think in the future we will think to do that.
it does matter, and the fact that we were told there was a vote, and when we looked for a vote, there was multiple references to tabled minutes, waiting for lawyer comments. If you review Robert Rules of Order, straw polls are actually out of order. They're not allowed on the broader sense of a board. So there's a couple different things that happened in this process that, as a voter who's really interested in the 4222 configuration, was an important discussion that should have happened.
I agree. And I think if you ask any one of us, we would remember that we voted. I know we voted on that. We just didn't formally vote on it as a board. And that's correct. One thing, we use Robert's rules for small boards, Bob's rules, and we can have informal votes.
My book that I have, which is the most current one, states that the board can push it to a committee to discuss and bring back, but it doesn't reference small board, and on every other note it does say small boards can do this. So I would urge you to review that, make sure that you can actually do straw polls going forward.
Paul Norman, Dummerston. I concur with the essence of what this young lady is talking about, because this was an important decision that's been made by the board, and without any discussion, open discussion on the board level that reached the public, and the fact that it was sort of done, it was done in committee based on a straw poll that did not indicate any particular preference of which way to go, and not giving the public a chance to weigh in on that decision. It doesn't lend itself, that kind of decision doesn't lend itself to transparency and encourage confidence on the part of the public.
Thank you. None of us had any intent of being anything less than transparent. Most of us are here based on a position in favor of transparency based on past actions of other people.
I understand. It just doesn't come across that way.
And we apologize.
Can I say something?
Of course you can.
One time that the public will have input will be on November 19th. Because on November 19th, the Articles of Agreement that we have presented as a board will be voted on by 14,000 potential voters in the 4 towns. So that's going to be the time. So go to the polls and make your voice heard.
Okay. All right. We're done here. The Programmatic and Performance Equity Committee, Emily, thank you.
So we met twice in the past 3 weeks, mostly to discuss field usage. So we were tasked with thinking about the equity amongst the teams and genders, and amongst levels of teams, so varsity versus JV. So that mostly will be presented when we talk about the turf conversation. We had a very brief discussion at the end about after-school care, which is still on our issue tracking sheet. We have a few different things on there, but it's kind of prime time. we're trying to look into what are the different after-school care options across the district, and Lyle has sent us a bunch of information that we still have to review. And not only what exists, but what are they doing, or which ones are academically focused versus, maybe in the extracurricular realm. And one thing that was brought up at the meeting was kind of food after school and snacks, and so we will be looking into a little bit of that, most likely at our next meeting, which is next week.
Anyone have any questions for Emily at this? Anybody have any questions for Emily at this time? Okay, moving on to the Climate Crisis Task Force.
Yeah, so the Climate Crisis Task Force met 2 weeks ago, I believe it was, with two things to talk about. One was to talk about the progress that we've made on a kind of long-term project where we assess what the school district, how it impacts or how it comes in contact with climate change, what we're doing that is beneficial, what there's room for change on. So that was one part. That's a kind of long-term process that requires a bit of research. The other part that we did was we were tasked with discussing how the proposed artificial turf would, what the impact would be on the environment. We didn't come up with an exact recommendation because we were still reviewing some new information, but our points were artificial turf is a heat collector made of fossil fuels. It needs to be replaced with a new field every 8 to 12 years in perpetuity. Grass takes in carbon and emits oxygen, and toxic chemicals will leach out during and after useful life of artificial turf. Those were our points that we came to in the meeting. And we should be meeting again in another 2 weeks.
Thanks, Tom. Anyone have any questions for Tom right now? Okay. Communications Council, is there anyone here to? Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, Mr. Dimes.
Hi, Rick Dimes from Brattleboro. It's not clear to me when or if the public is allowed to comment on individual committee reports.
The public may comment, I'm sorry, I was looking out, they may comment, however, if it's specifically a discussion of the turf, that will come later in the agenda. So you might want to hold it off till then.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone here from the Communications Council who would like to communicate about your last meeting? Because Tim apparently is ill. Okay. I know that they sent out what was hopefully a reasonable explanation of the articles that will be on the ballot. But I saw another excellent explanation of them on the Brattleboro, Vermont Facebook page just today, so please feel free to look there. It's a very good explanation. Yes, Jay.
Jody Armado, Dummerston. I am concerned that the communications, it's only a couple of weeks away for the vote, and people throughout the area are very, very confused about what they are going to be voting on, because they don't understand the amendments from the study committee versus the default agreement, articles of agreement, versus what we're doing now. And they don't understand why or what. And so it really has to be very, very clear to people as to why they're voting and what they're voting on. And I hope the communications people will do that.
I have read a press release. Is it waiting final approval to be? It's waiting final approval to be sent out, but I have read a press release. Dave?
There were a couple of things have been happening in this area, not surprisingly. One press release went out to all the media contacts that we're aware of, and the Communications Committee expanded that list. And another one is going to go out right after Veterans Day, so that makes sense. We also have, that's Monday. We also have two public meetings scheduled, one in Dummerston on Tuesday night, I think it's the 15th, 14th? 13th, and Wednesday night here in the multi-purpose room at BAMS at 6 o'clock on Wednesday. The
14th is Thursday.
Is Thursday?
14th is Thursday.
And that's when we're here?
Yep.
Okay, so Wednesday the 13th is in Dummerston at 6, And Thursday, the 14th, is here in the multipurpose room at the middle school, also at 6 o'clock. And what you saw on Facebook was part of Robin Morgan's efforts to get it out through social media. So there will be more information coming. As far as the level of detail you talked about, we're not going to do that. We're getting information about the articles and asking people to vote them up or down.
And we will be seeking people to do the informational meetings from this board. So
hopefully we all will.
Yeah, Christina just has it on the agenda. Flipping between 3 pages now. The Diversity and Equity Committee. The Diversity and Equity Committee met on October 17th, just ahead of Attorney T.J. Donovan's forum for a hate-free Vermont. We had a report from the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Social Justice. They're studying how to implement ideas regarding equity and social justice across curriculums, and a study group is meeting. They're trying to get elementary school staff meetings, but they're kind of difficult to schedule, and they're visiting school leadership teams. They're planning Diversity Day, and really looking forward to it. And the middle school students would like to hold Vermont Schools Against Racism conference here. So we are looking into that. We've been requested the opportunity to have some materials printed from our diversity office that can be taken to career fairs throughout New England by Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation, and it's a great opportunity, and we're looking forward to honesty. We discussed a lot of the challenges in trying to make systemic changes, but we're working on them. And we have an amendment, if you'll just stand by just a moment so I can get it out of my other file. We'd like to make a recommendation amending this board's decision to put the pride flag, the Philly pride flag in every town, and I can read it out. I move that the WSESD board direct the principals of all schools to organize the creation of a student design display, including the inclusion of all marginalized people in our schools. The design shall be approved by the school board, and the formulation of design shall preferably include the inclusive pride flag, which is a different flag than we talked about before. It includes a triangle in the corner representing trans and ace folks. In the case of difficulty in settling on a design, or in the interest of time constraints, prominent display of that flag shall be considered a reasonable alternative. And we reiterate, the display and/or flag shall be located prominently in the main entrance area of the school, or at another location that shall allow it to be viewed by the majority of students, staff, family, and visitors to the school. The display and/or flag shall not be moved or blocked from view for any reason other than school maintenance without the express approval of the school board. And that is a motion that amends our last motion, so.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays or abstentions? Seeing the ayes have it, the revised proposal is approved. I can email that to you, Wendy.
You read my mind, or my notes.
Yes. Good. There are a couple more things from the minutes about the diversity committee I wanted to
Sure,
mention,
please do,
since we've got a big audience. Aside from the work that the staff, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Social Justice are doing in the schools, there also are a lot of things going on getting students and the school community into other communities. There's a multicultural affairs group at UMass that is looking to partner with the middle school students to have an anti-racism conference here. The Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation is offered to include our materials at job fairs. that they do, when we're looking at the materials that we developed last year with the Vermont Partnership to see if we can update and use them or to create more. We're exploring internships and paraeducator options for college students to come of color to come into the schools. We exploring places to go for job fairs, and we're also, what's the other? Oh, and that they are working to develop aware groups in all the elementary schools. Thanks.
Thanks, Ted. Okay. Now to find the next committee. Mission and Goals Committee, which I am not aware of the existence of. Would Christina like to establish one?
No, that one was to go through the committees and sort of understand, approve the missions and goals that they've established.
Ah, I see.
But we're not going to get to that today.
Okay, we are not. And
Goes to the next agenda.
the WSCSU. That would normally be Christina, but perhaps one of the reps who was actually there would like to report back.
It wasn't there.
There wasn't.
It wasn't
but
there?
I can announce that there is a meeting scheduled on November 18, 5:30 in Vernon for WSCSU.
Okay. And moving on, unless there is anything else from the committees, for the committees? Okay. And we're back to finances to approve
All right,
warrants. John?
I will read the warrants that we discussed, and so what I'm looking for, I'll just read the numbers and the amounts, and then we'll be looking for a motion and an approval. Warrants numbers: 1,080, 1,085, 1,088, 1,094, 1,096, in the amount of $171,467.27. Warrants number 1,093, 1,098, 1,100, and 1,101, in the amount of $128,385.66. Warrant number 1,102, in the amount of $315. Warrant number 1,104, 1,105, 1,106, 1,107, in the amount of $2,615,881.03. Warrants number 1,097, 1,103, 1,108, 1,110, in the amount of $162,733.15. Warrant numbers 1,109, 1,113, 1,114, 1,115, in the amount of $207,892.89. And warrant number 1,116 through 1,119, $97,841.87. And warrants number 1,112, 1,123, and 1,124, in the amount of $158,832.36. Warrants numbers 1,121, 1,122, 1,125, 1,126, 1,127, in the amount of $82,181.80. Payroll authorizations for September 27th, 2019, in the amount of $1,263,677.47. October 11th, my birthday, $1,266,064.95.
Happy birthday.
October 25th, $1,274,324.64.
Thank you, Sean. Do I hear, we have approved these in committee, but I'd like
approval from the whole board, so do I hear a motion to approve all of the warrants that Sean so valiantly just read out?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Though I know we had long discussion earlier. Anybody? Okay. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? The ayes have it. The warrants are approved. Flipping back again to the revised. And it is now time for the administrative update.
So, a few things. We received word from the state about our lead testing dates. So beginning in December, mid-December through mid-January, Albany Academy will have lead testing done at each site. A letter will go home to all families just talking about that and describing the exact dates and when. I have received a request. You may remember last time we approved Catherine Mason's request for resignation. She is asking you to, if she could rescind that letter of resignation and be reinstated, so that will be up to the board to decide.
I'd like to make a motion that we reconsider the resignation of Catherine Mason and reinstate her position at Oak Grove.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? The ayes have it. Welcome back, Ms. Mason.
Thank you. In the last board meeting, you had directed me to look at a Title IX assessment. We contacted a few people and found that it could be quite expensive. We're going to start with a self-assessment while we look around and do some more research to see if we can find someone that can come in and do the assessment for a reasonable cost. We will eventually, but it is, hiring someone is not going to be our first step. We're going to work on a self-assessment first. As I said earlier, WSESU meeting in Vernon, November 18th, 5:30. I'm trying to set up meetings with each legacy board. So if you were on a legacy board or if you're in the audience tonight, your former board chair is trying to contact you to set up a meeting for November 14. The only thing on the agenda is property transfer. So starting at 5 o'clock and then every half hour, I've tried to schedule boards. Our attorney, Mark Ottinger, would be available to us that evening, and that will happen here. And we need to warn those no later than Tuesday, so please be in touch with the former board chair if you have not heard yet. And then I have one executive session, attorney-client relations.
Okay. And I believe we are moving on to unfinished business. Oh boy, this is where Christina's flipping back and forth gets a little confusing. But we have an adoption of F-35, the school animal policy, which I should have on a different agenda. So, everybody's familiar with the animal policy? Do I hear a motion to approve policy F-35?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Can I have a question?
We discuss after we have a motion and a second.
Second.
Yes, thank you. Any discussion?
I know I've asked this before, Jody Normando from Dummerston, but I'm still concerned with the policy talking about, well, I know in Dummerston they have chicks that they raise, and I know that the other animals are raised or been in here for the science. And I just want to make really sure that under the guidelines for other animals, where it says each principal shall determine whether they're okay, that they have the sole authority and not this policy or not the board to allow the certain animals that are following here. Is that the case?
principals have the policy, but have the sole authority, but with any policy, if there's a problem, this board is able to intervene.
If there's a problem.
Yeah, if there's a
But I
problem.
hate to see some of the things that are happening in all the schools disappear because of one policy covering everybody.
So would I.
Yeah, I know, and
That's what we work to avoid in drafting
Yeah.
this one.
so I just want to be assured that some of these things can still happen.
Yep.
Yes.
Mark Younger, Brattleboro. When are we going to discuss, what time is this artificial turf going to happen? Because I've been up since 4:30, working till 5, and I got here late, and I'm wondering, when is this going to happen?
This is rescheduled to come
Now, you
almost
said
at the
earlier,
end.
you said that we're waiting for somebody to be involved in this.
We're waiting for the chair of this board to
Why are
return.
we waiting?
Because it was requested by the chair and she sets the agenda.
So we have to do everything to her will?
We decided to do it this way.
Yes.
I'm
We,
asking her that question.
right, because she made the request, and in light of the fact that she's putting 40 to 50 hours a week, asking for half an hour to go to her kid's induction into the National Honor Society is not much to ask.
So do you have an answer for me what time that's going to
No,
happen?
I do not, because we have other agenda items to get through. I don't know.
So she didn't tell you when she's coming?
She actually planned this out as carefully as she could manage
Which
to
was?
allow her to come back. I don't know, I'd have to sit here and add up all the numbers. I have this calculator, that'll take 45 minutes. I would remind the public that personal attacks are not in order.
This is not an attack. I've been working all day, and I'm just trying to get my say in what's gonna happen here. And I've been going for over 12 hours, and I gotta get up at 4 o'clock again, and I'm asking you when this was gonna start, and you cannot tell me because we're waiting for somebody. That's all I'm saying.
No, I can't answer you because it was moved on the agenda and we have an agenda to get through. If we get through this agenda and Ms. Naylor is not here yet, I will begin.
Okay, you didn't say that before, though. You said you were waiting for her to come.
Because she specifically requested it.
I
That's
hear
why
you.
we
I hear you
rearranged.
totally.
Okay then. Now then, where were we? Animals?
Animal policy.
Yes,
We have a
Ellen.
motion on the table.
We have a,
and
and
second.
we're discussing, and I just have a person who'd like to discuss.
I just wonder if we have a copy that we can see of what the policy is that you're talking about?
Printed, no, but on the SU, yeah, it's on the SU website. Okay, Jody has one to share with you. Okay. Any further discussion of the animal policy at this point?
Elizabeth Bissell, Honey, I have a hypothetical question. If the principal ultimately gets to call for the school, correct? You know, to say whether or not the policy that's happening for that individual school is what's what unless there's a problem.
No, that's other animals. We have specific policies for some of the animals, including dogs, if that's what you're asking.
Oh, so the dogs and sort of standard animals have a different policy? I'm just not sure. I
Dogs
understand.
have a separate policy,
Okay.
and then
And
there
if
are.
there were a problem, so it's, I'm sorry. All right, well, I'm just gonna read it then and
That's
see
a
what
good
it
idea.
says.
That's a good idea. Favor?
So, wait, I do
Okay,
have
she,
a
they're not
question.
done. She had a question.
Okay, so certified dogs have to be, they all have to be certified. If a dog is coming into the school, they need to be certified as,
Yes.
and who checks the certification?
Christina found a particular certification that is approved by the AKC, and she has that information, and I have it, but again, it's buried very deeply.
Okay, so at
there-
a particular school, if there were an issue, the question would be posed to see the dog certification then, right?
We would need to see the dog certification anyway. We cannot be reactive to things like animal bites. We have to be proactive.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Liz?
It's Liz Adams, buddy. It's the AKC Good Citizenship Test that they have to pass. And then there's a plus on that for being with kids. So it's like a two-part thing.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, Tara, sorry.
Tara Casting, Putney. Who will be keeping the certifications for the pets and the dogs? Will that be a school responsibility or a district responsibility for pets allowed on site?
That hasn't been considered. As far as I know, I would assume that the district would be responsible for keeping those records. Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Would the ayes have it, the policy is passed. I'm sorry, I'm not clear on what Christina has typed here. H7 leadership councils.
We need to table that.
We need to table that for next time?
The language in the policy didn't get changed when we changed it for the amendments. So the language in the policy and the language in the amendments are different. So the amendment actually would be passed before we have the policy, even though we wanted to have the policy before the amendment was passed. So we need to table it and make the changes and then present it again.
All right, well, we don't have Tim here to review the first readings of our next three policies. Has everyone read them? The public participation at board meetings, tobacco prohibition, and freedom of expression. Okay, this can be considered a first reading. They will not be passed without further discussion, but we have to read them 3 times before we can make any kind of motion.
And they're on the website if anybody wants to see what they say.
Where are they on the website?
Under the school boards.
All right, I'm flipping back again. Yes, Jim?
Are they going to be read today, tonight?
No.
No, we don't usually read them out loud.
Because I have one comment on the public.
Oh, then please do.
My only comment, I thought it was pretty well written, but my only one comment is where it says public input, like Jody Normando, Dummerston, where it says public input on items not on the agenda, there will be time set aside. And I'm only concerned with people who might come with something to say that's not on the agenda, that's elderly and wants to go to bed early, or there's a parent that needs to take care of a child, and that they might have to be pushed off till the end of the meeting. So I would just suggest that would be in a timely fashion. Like it's been in the past, it's been in front of the agenda. So they don't have to stay 4 hours for the meeting to get to have their say.
I agree with that. I would hope that people like that would contact the board chair ahead of time and make a specific request for such a thing, because that's not unreasonable at all, what you're suggesting.
A lot of people might not know that they can request it, so.
You can always ask. Hello, Christina. And I believe, Lyle, you have a leadership
very
council
quick.
update?
So we have 2 schools that have set dates for leadership councils, and the other schools are still looking for people that are interested in being on leadership councils. So if you're interested in being on the leadership council at a school, contact your building principal. You are to write a letter of interest that includes why you might be interested and what you might be able to bring to the leadership council. It should, we're encouraging parents, community members, there will be teachers, and a board member will be also joining.
When will we be assigned to leadership councils? Is that in the future? I'm sorry to bombard you.
Now I know where we are. Okay, great, thank you, sorry about that. I think we're waiting till they form, so
So we have 2 meetings scheduled, one on the 21st and one on the 22nd.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome.
So Putney on the 21st and Guilford on the 22nd. So if you want to do that sooner rather than later, that would be great.
Putney on the 21st and Guilford on the 22nd. So is there, before we make any decisions on this, I'll recognize Jamie Courtois.
Hi, thank you, Jamie Courtois from Putney. There's a group of us in Putney that submitted our letters for the Leadership Council. We're really excited to get going. One of the challenges I have is that the date was set without consulting with any of the people who submitted letters. And so I sit on another committee that's being started by the town of Putney, and they set around a doodle poll, and we set the date collaboratively so that the majority of the people who wanted to participate could participate. So I just wanted to connect with, that's a process we've used at town level, and I just wondered if we could use that for Leadership Council so that those of us who submitted letters can actually participate.
That sounds like a great process going forward for people, and I know the administrators have a lot of afternoons already booked, so that will make the doodle poll smaller to do that. But
so I'll put that on the agenda for their first meeting.
Excellent. Thanks for the suggestion, Jamie.
Christine?
Yes.
There was a comment made by members of the public that they would like to go to the meat of the meeting, which is the turf field discussion.
Okay.
So.
Oh, we're right there. That's next.
I'm Leslie Harrison Brattleboro. I'm assuming that's going to be a very long and complicated discussion, the turf discussion. And I wonder if I could make my presentation first, because mine will be short.
What is the will of the board? No, we haven't finished Leadership Council yet, so why don't we finish that item out, and then we'll go back to that. Because we still have to assign people to Putney and Guilford. Is there anybody interested in taking the first Putney?
So can I ask a question first?
Sure, yeah.
So are we having a strategy where, because I can picture multiple strategies. One is like there's a standing board member at the meeting so that we really know the schools. Another strategy is to have rotating board members. Should the board members be from a community other than, like, to familiarize themselves with the school, like, or we're just going to go random? I mean, all the ways are fine. I'm just wondering, is there a preference, or do we want to just piecemeal right now and figure out next time?
Why don't we piecemeal it for now, because because it may be somebody wants to do Putney, because these dates are now set and we have pretty full schedules on this board, so it'd be just nice to get a member of the board going there. And then we've talked, both options have been spoken about. One is that we could, one option was that we would have a standing member, and one is that people would rotate through all the time to have understanding of the schools, because many of us don't. Sometimes it was people's first time in one of the schools when we've had a meeting there. So I think we should probably decide that as a board and figure out what works for people. We had also talked about having maybe two, one that's a standing, one that's a rotating, but we need some more bodies because we have 10 leadership councils and 8 of us. So that means that would be 20 meetings for 8 people. You do the math based on all the other meetings we're doing. So maybe that's a goal for when we have 10 members that we could look at that. But let's just try to piecemeal it in so there is some conduit from these people that have done the hard work of getting these leadership councils going, is my thought. Does anybody else have a different take on that idea? Before we finish this out, I'll recognize Tara.
Sorry, Tara Cassine, Putney. 2 questions. One is, how are the people on the leadership committees being selected by the board or by the principal? And 2, how is the notification going out to those people? And 3, it would be really great if we could plan a non-work hour time for said committees so that people who really have an interest could attend. That's it. Thank you.
So I can answer. Anybody that's asked is on it because we've had so few people, except for Putney. The first meeting is at 4 o'clock, which was, we hoped, a compromise between work time and teachers having to stay into the evening. At that first meeting, as Jamie just suggested, we could do a doodle poll, we can talk about time. But if we want to have representation from teachers, We probably can't have it in the evening. We can probably never have it in the evening if we're going to have students there for any, unless their parents are going to be willing to bring them back for some reason. So at this point, anyone that's had sent a letter is considered on. I've been making that determination just because there are so few people. And the other question, there will be a notice sent to anyone that's interested when the first meeting is.
I think ultimately we have to appoint the people, so those names should probably come before us for appointment as they come through, because that's what we're, although the policy hasn't been implemented yet, nor has the amendment passed yet, but might as well just follow the process that we've laid out.
Send those to you tomorrow.
Thank you. Back up to the question at hand. Anybody able to make Putney or on the 21st or Guilford on the 22nd?
I can do Putney.
Okay, so Anne's taking Putney. 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock for Putney, 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock? Sure. It's 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock for Guilford, I'm sorry.
Was that a volunteering? Kelly? Oh, you can't do 1 o'clock, right? Well, if
What time is the meeting in Guilford?
1 o'clock.
I think it's
sorry.
1 o'clock.
I can do that.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for stepping up, folks. Does that cover leadership councils? Excellent. Mr. Norman Dow.
Paul Norman Dow, Dummerston. I'm listening to this conversation about wanting to get people involved in the leadership councils, and you're making meetings at 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock. I mean, working hours are generally, till 5, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And if you want to get participation, and the logic that Lyle put forth was that teachers, if you want to have a teacher, the citizens of community are contributing their time to this endeavor. I would think if a teacher wanted to be on the leadership council, he or she could make time in the evening as much as a regular citizen could. I just don't understand the logic.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we're feeling our way through this. We really have no idea how it should work out or how exactly it should be structured, and everyone is going to be different, and that's good because all the schools are different. And those considerations are going to come in. If people come and want to, and they need to have it later, then that committee, that leadership council will try and find ways to work around that. We can't set a definitive policy and say they have to be at 7 o'clock or they have to be at 1 o'clock or anything. We have to just let it unfold, see what's working in these schools. To try and direct it from the top down, we'll guarantee that it won't work.
I hope it works when you get participants.
If it doesn't, we'll change. We'll do something different.
Okay,
But we've got to do something if we want to make any progress at all.
I don't want to have it back and forth.
Thank you.
Yes.
So how many folks have volunteered from Guilford and how many from Putney? 3 community residents?
3 from Guilford,
Parents, okay.
4 or 5 from Putney.
And then how many teachers?
The Putney, they're using their leadership team, and leadership team meets from 3 to 4, and then they were going to stay on from 4 to 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Guilford?
Guilford, there are no teachers yet. They were going to do it at 1 o'clock for their first meeting because we could cover somebody to come in and join the meeting for that day. And it's also the day before a long week, vacation week for students, so to get started and get it off the ground, they wanted to just get it going.
Can all the, I mean, you might not know, but can all the people, the community representatives in Guilford make that?
I
So just
know
wondering
that the people that have sent letters have all agreed to that.
Okay, Brattleboro and Dummerston, you got to get your leadership councils. And Guilford have thrown down the gauntlet. Jamie, I think you've already spoken to leadership council, so if I call on everybody twice, I'm going to be we're going to be here till midnight. Yes, I'm sorry.
Kurt Dimes from Brattleboro. I would like to follow up on Mr. Norman Doe's sentiments about participation. The board has, I appreciate David's candor about, figuring things out. The board missed a beat in representation. Brattleboro has recently approved a charter amendment to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. My organization promoted that. Brattleboro Common Sense promoted that for the sake of greater participation in government. And one of the provisions of this was that 16 and 17-year-olds would also serve on the school board. And I think it's been overlooked. It's an important thing, I think, for engendering participation among younger people, not just in town, in the limited sense of town government, but also maybe especially in the school board.
I will just, not to have it back and forth, but we are going to have student council representatives sitting in our meetings on a regular basis as sort of a way to have the student voice heard at the table and try to figure out, I think it's on our agenda tonight towards the end, if we're still awake by then, to figure out a way that we can increase student input from that particular demographic. So I appreciate your input.
Thank you.
Very quickly, Ruby McAfee from Putney. So 4 of the 5 people from Putney are here and didn't know about the meeting. And so the question I have is who is going to be communicating? And I understand you guys are rolling with it, but it's fairly important that we make sure that everybody who is going to be on it knows, even if they don't have a choice in this first meeting's time.
So I'm going to maybe ask that you direct that question to her directly, who's sort of putting it together at the Putney level, because I don't know what every principal is doing at every moment. So that might be an easier way to resolve it. If you haven't heard back, also, you know, I sent an email out to my legacy board members, and nothing came back because none of them checked that email anymore. So you know, stuff happens. So if you could just check with her, that would be awesome. Moving off of leadership councils, am I correct? Everything's been taken care of on that. Excellent. So we have a request from a member of the public to change the, move the auditorium up 2 points, which I estimate should be about a 5-minute discussion before the turf field discussion. Is there any concern about doing that on the board's part? Okay, then we will go to item C, auditorium naming discussion. And I will turn the request over to Leslie Klamski. Would you like me to do some background or no? Are you good to go?
Go ahead.
We've had a request to have a naming of the auditorium in honor of Robert Kramsky, who's taught here for 46 years and runs some fabulous productions. And it's your last chance, folks. So this February will be his last run at the BUHS production. And on the last night, we've had a lot of community interest in having not missing that opportunity to be able to name that auditorium that night when his students will be there. It'll be his last night. It has been our policy not to name something officially until after that person has retired. And sadly, Mr. Kramsky will be retiring as of June 30th. So our hope is to consider naming the auditorium effective July 1, 2020, but that the announcement of this could be made during the last performance of the BUHS production.
So moved.
So moved. Oh, I've already got a movement. Okay, well, we'll get the motion on the table. Get the motion on the table. Thank you, Sean. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Oh, many seconds for that one, but I'm giving it to Thomas. And is there any board discussion on this? Is there any public comment on this?
The only thing I would change is rather than the last performance, it would be the Friday night performance.
Right.
We amend the amendment, or amend the motion to?
Yes, we should amend that. I will. You can amend. Why don't you amend it?
I move we amend the motion to Friday night rather than the final performance.
Is there a second on that motion?
Second.
All those in favor
Aye.
of the motion to amend?
Aye.
The abstention? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion now would be to announce the naming effective July 1, 2020 of the Kramsky Auditorium on the Friday night performance of the BUHS musical production. Any other public comment? All those in favor of the motion to name the Crampston Auditorium effective July 1, 2020, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays, abstentions? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Come July 1, we will have a new name for the auditorium. Get your tickets now, folks. Get your tickets now. Going back to the turf field discussion. Has everybody gotten, so I sent via email the health stuff, I believe PPE sent along sort of the different field needs. Anybody need a copy of this? Did you get that, Thomas?
We got it now.
Okay, oh great.
So I've been looking over it.
Just gonna put it on the screen when you're ready. Oh, excellent, excellent. You guys are so prepared. And what else? Finance Committee has some thoughts. I unfortunately had to leave early, so I might have to turn that piece over to you, Sean, to discuss.
I touched on it a little bit in the Finance Committee report. Actually, now that I have the opportunity, I would also like to say that I missed a report. We did have 2 Finance Committee meetings in addition to the one tonight. We had one on the 29th of October and one on the 31st of October. Unfortunately, partially due to my error, the 31st was not as productive as we had hoped. And the Finance Committee tonight, we were discussing about the possibility of a turf field. We're also talking with the administration, and Frank Rucker had some comments. And as everybody knows, it's been an extremely contentious subject. There's been so many people who feel so passionately about it, either one way or the other. So we initially had hoped to bring a Finance Committee recommendation, or at least a report to this board, the WSESD, but we failed to do that tonight. And we did have some suggestions. One of the things that was brought up was that if we do not go forward with an RFQ or an RFP, that there's a possibility that it will be status quo for next year if this board cannot, vote and come to some kind of a consensus. That was one possibility. Another possibility would be to actually say it's time for public input, take the final decision-making process out of the hands of the WSESD board and put it totally on the population of the 4 towns, the potential voting population of 14,000 people. That would be a possibility. Another possibility is to not send out an RFQ and an RFP and hire an engineering firm for a substantial sum to do a review of all the fields on the BUHS campus. So that's another possibility. So right now, because of the flux of so much public opinion, so much board diversity of opinion, so much unknown, so much speculation, that we're kind of stuck in Vermont mud in the spring. So what we do from here, I think, I don't know if it'll be decided tonight, but the Finance Committee, that's where we ended our meeting tonight.
So I should probably back up. Emily has pointed out to me, wait a minute, everybody might not have stayed tuned for all brilliant 3.5 hours of our last meeting. Different committees were taking a look at different parts, and the charge of the Finance Committee was to take a look at just trying to clarify the costs of the various options. understanding that they are estimates, and my thanks to Chris Sawyer for working tirelessly to try to answer my questions, my questions, trying to nail down the costs and providing us with a lot of good data from other districts that have done this. The Climate Crisis Committee was working on the environmental aspects of it, of the field, because there's discussion about, well, you don't have to use synthetic fertilizer, and sort of taking a look at that. The Equity Committee was looking at field access, I think with a special eye towards Title IX and assuring that women's athletic teams had access, and kind of taking inventory of where we are right now, so that the board could have a better understanding of the challenges for field access. And an ad hoc committee of two had a fun weekend reading a lot of the research and interpreting a lot of the research on the various health aspects, such as they are, various medical studies out there on artificial turf. So Sean gave a presentation of the Finance Committee. We do have a document from Chris Sawyer that gives us some idea of costs just on the turf. Does everybody have a copy of that for the minutes from Finance? So there is some guidance there. Maybe not quite where we needed to get to, but it's a good starting point anyway. Is there another committee that would like to?
Excuse me?
Yes.
I've been holding my hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, generally we have board discussion first, and then we take public comment. So,
Okay, is that how it works here?
yeah. Generally, we let the board discuss and go through.
We had a whole meeting of conversation.
Sorry?
We had a whole meeting of public input.
Right, we had a meeting last time that everybody could give public comment first, and all we did was take public comment. We will take public comment before taking any action, but we haven't really gotten a chance to talk to you about this as a board. Actually,
Well, I have one question. I don't understand. Why aren't you putting this to the general public for an entire vote, up or down? Because he just said there's so many people back and forth, for it or against it. Why isn't it going to the general public for one big vote and having whoever have the dollar amount and boom, it's out there?
This is one of the,
It's already been voted on.
so this is one of the discussions.
Where?
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Not public.
So, excuse me, you can't talk back and forth.
saying
Liz, Mark, you can't talk back and
Bang
forth.
the table with?
So, yeah, I don't have a gavel, darn it. Budget cuts. So, that's one of the options. Somebody in the community called me, and that was a suggestion I brought to the Finance Committee. This is the first opportunity we as a board have to consider that. So that's one of the options that we're going to be talking about. So
why are we?
I can't do it back and forth because I really want to get to
Point of order. Point of order.
Yes, point of order.
Madam Chairman, perhaps Mr.
Younger.
Mr. Younger could speak. We could amend the rules for a moment. Mr. Younger could speak and go home and get some rest.
Yeah, I've been up since 4:30.
And we could all have some procedural relief.
I'm just concerned about so we haven't had a chance to talk about that as a board, and the board has asked for all these reports to be done to help make a decision, and this is one of the options on the table, is to bring it to the public for a full vote for an athletic turf field. So if the board wants to take public comment before we have discussion, so we can have an unabrogated discussion as a board, I will entertain that motion.
Considering the circumstances of this gentleman, I think it might be, if he makes it brief, I'd be willing to hear it.
Do I have a second on that?
Yeah, one person.
Okay, so we're going to suspend the rules for this. All those in favor of this?
Aye.
Any extensions? As we are allowing one person to speak. Everybody had 2 minutes.
And maybe a time limit.
Yeah, I will only be a couple minutes. Mark Younger, Brattleboro, Vermont. I was listening to what he just said. To me, it doesn't make sense if you're going to think about spending money on a survey and then not know what the total cost of everything is, and what I think it's an 8-year down the road, another cost that you're going to put the entire community and the dollar amount that I look at that and I'm like, why aren't you putting it just, instead of the board, putting it right out to the public to vote on it on such and such a day, up or down, for you guys don't have to worry about this. You don't have to worry about the big discussion. put it out to the general public and make them decide themselves on the whole thing. And that way, your hands are washed, nice and clean. And the dollar amount I've heard was $1.2 million, and we only have a certain amount in funds put aside, and the rest would have to be borrowed or gotten from some other place, and then 8 years down the road, it's gonna be another additional cost. I don't understand it. I can't fathom the cost that we're gonna spend on this when we could just have grass for the $600,000 or $700,000 we have in escrow. We could put brand new turf on the whole darn field for how many years? You know, it does not make any sense. And the taxpayers and people who pay rent in this town, their costs keep going up because things like this, it adds to the total cost. Meaning, one person's paying $1,000, the next year he's paying $1,025, and the next year it keeps going up. And Brattleboro as a whole is costing too much money for stuff. And it just doesn't add up to me. And I don't understand this. Why isn't it just a big vote? One vote. Go ahead.
Well, after 2 minutes, I'll just hold up.
No,
It's 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Younger. Back to the presentation. Does PPE want to go over there? You guys ready to do your?
And we'll just plug in.
No, I'm the woman.
You might have to take a scroll or two.
Before we get going on this, could I ask a question? Sure. I was just wondering where the data was generated in order to make this. Was it from the Chris Sawyer or the athletic department?
So I'll start by prefacing it while she's getting it up so everybody can see, because we didn't print off enough for everybody. So Chris sent us tons of data, so I don't know where he is right now, but thank you, Chris, for all that. It allowed us to kind of data dive. Thank you. So a lot of data on the demographics for the sports, the amount of participation in each sports across a few years, where each sports team was practicing, where each sports team was playing, schedules for the sports teams, how long practices were, I mean, a lot of stuff. So what we tried to do on the equity committee was figure out what should we do with this, because it was a little overwhelming. So once the charts are up, I can kind of walk us through. We were mainly tasked, we kind of went big picture at first, but then we thought a little bit about more, okay, the board has tasked us with thinking about equity and access, not coming up with tons of solutions like voting and everything. I mean, we were really tasked with something specific, so we tried to stay true to that.
This is the whole packet. That's what's in here.
Yep. Okay, so some of the first stuff that we came up with was just looking at simple demographics, like who is playing what sport. And then we'll go into a little bit more field use. We have a lot of charts for folks. Will you be able to flip through as we go?
Yeah, you might have to prompt me, but
Okay.
sure.
So first is the demographics. So just looking specifically, we were tasked to look at Title IX, so that's gender equity. Although we did look at levels, so JV versus varsity, where are they playing, and then also access to different things like bleachers, bathrooms, lights, all these things. So the first two charts are on athletes by gender. So this is just for fall. It doesn't include cross country. We didn't have a number on that. So it's only for soccer, field hockey, and football. So you can see that there are 85 females versus 110 males. And then you can see the breakdown by sport. So when we look at the sports, 55 boys soccer players, that's on varsity, JV, and JV. So 3 teams. Same thing for girls. Field hockey is 2 teams. Only girls play field hockey. Well, not only girls play field hockey, but in our district, it's primarily a female sport. And then football has 55, and that is just JV and varsity. You'll have to flip through. So after looking at that, we went into field use by athletes and autumn co-curricular, and we did this overall at first, not breaking it down by gender, just to see what the distribution was. So we have 28% of fall athletes play game on regulation fields with lights, bleachers, and facilities nearby. Unfortunately, but one thing that we, I think a lot of people already know, but it's good to take account of, is that's only actually boys football who has that. And it's Natowich Field, the field that we're actually looking at right now. 34% of athletes play games on non-reg fields with lights, limited bleachers, and facilities nearby, ish. And those were the field hockey teams, the varsity girls, and boys soccer. So varsity and varsity boys. And then 38% of fall athletes play games on regulation-sized fields with no lights, limited bleachers, and limited facilities. Those are actually mainly JV teams. So you realize that actually the JV, and if any of this, strikes the administration as incorrect, because I know you guys are dealing with a lot of the data, just please ask a question. Anybody can ask a question, really. So we actually realized that regulation-sized fields the JV teams are playing at regulation-sized fields, which was surprising to us. We didn't know that the varsities were struggling with the regulation-sized fields, but they had lights, but JV have regulation size. So it's just something to note because it gives us a few options if we decide not to just look at Natowich. So then we have the next chart, which splits 2 pages, unfortunately, but we can just go to the chart. Oh, good, up there. So then we tried to break it down by gender. When we just broke it down by gender, it was a little jarring because it didn't take into account that it's really just the football field making up the difference in gender. So if we look at this, we have 50% of male athletes play in regulation fields with lights and bleachers, and 50% of male athletes are the football team. I mean, it's a massive team. So 17% of male athletes play on non-reg fields with lights. This is pretty much the soccer team, the varsity boys. And 33% play on the reg fields with no lights, limited bleachers, and limited bathrooms. It's the JV. On the female side, we have 0% of female athletes play on a regulation field with lights and bleachers and facility nearby. So that's a pretty big difference. Now, one thing we had brainstormed too, or just talked about, was like actually if the female, like the field hockey team, for example, was playing on a regulation field with lights, then it would kind of make up that difference because it's a male-only sport football, female-only field hockey. It's not a suggestion, it's just those tend to be the gender difference in our district. 57% of female athletes play on non-reg fields with lights, limited bleachers, and facilities nearby. This is the varsity girls soccer, and additionally the varsity and JV field hockey. And then 43% of female athletes play on regulation fields with no lights and limited bleachers and limited bathrooms. These are the folks who are playing on over at Sawyer and the other field. Fort Dummer, yeah. Moving on. We did it by level too. So it's actually something that was brought up on the committee, even though we were tasked to look specifically at gender, there is also differences in levels of play. And that's actually, up to the community really to decide we've given priority in some cases to varsity sports, assuming that everybody will kind of get their chance to play a varsity sport. But it is a question for the community whether or not we feel it's important to, have equity amongst all teams. 35% of varsity athletes play on regulation fields, 65 varsity athletes play on non-reg fields. We've kind of already looked a little bit at that. And 0 varsity athletes play on reg fields with limited bleachers, no lights, and no facilities. This number might actually be incorrect because we have the football team. So noted, and we will change that. So the varsity boys football team would be playing on a reg field. Oh no, sorry, that's the top number. 35% of varsity athletes play on regulation fields. They have lights. It was interesting to note that there's 79 varsity athletes compared to about 116 non-varsity athletes. So it's actually a lot larger of a set because they have JVB and JV. So just a note that when we prioritize varsity, a lot of people are playing on those fields that aren't, maybe they don't have bleachers, nobody can sit and watch them. So on non-varsity side, we have 24% of non-varsity fall athletes play in regulation fields with lights. 13% of non-varsity, and that would be the field hockey team, JV field hockey. 13% and football. 13% of non-varsity fall athletes play on non-reg fields with lights, and 63% of non-varsity fall athletes play on the regulation fields with the limited bleachers, no lights, and no facilities nearby. You can see how we broke down by team. It's not an exact science. We kind of just divided up the numbers we were given. Granted, one JVB team might be bigger than the other, but we didn't get into that. We just kind of did an average. The last page on here, and then I'll just summarize. Projected use of Natowich Field. So this is what was projected, you know, or what
Can you
was.
shift the, can you change the slide?
This is the change slide.
Oh, okay, thanks.
So 52%, so this was just the breakdown in who was expected to use this field if we were putting artificial turf. It doesn't mean it, I guess if we were putting grass turf, this wouldn't be the same because we have the issue of specifically field use around the grass. 52% would be football because they'd have also the JV team playing on it for all their games. 25% would be field hockey, varsity and JV. So they'd still have, at least they'd be on a regulation size field in that case. 11% varsity girls soccer and 11% varsity boys. I put the varsity girls in here. Actually, there was a question because it wasn't listed that varsity girls would actually play on this field. I put it on here assuming it was a mistake in the packet, but that's still the question if the varsity girls soccer would be playing on there. I don't know. And this is overall numbers, so of all the varsity girls soccer. JV boys and girls soccer and middle school teams would still use the regulation fields with limited bleachers, no lights and no facilities nearby. Likely, or maybe they could switch to the non-reg field with lights, but it's not regulation size, so I'm not sure it would go on there. Spring information is incomplete at this time, but we did talk about it on the committee. All softball games would still be played on fields requiring construction of facilities, seating, and lights to align with that offered by boys baseball. So right now, as many folks know, Tenney Field is lighted, Sawyer Field is not. And I'm gonna hurry it up here. The overview that we had was football skewed the stats a little bit, more towards gender in the male side of having a little bit more access to things. And JV, not surprisingly, has less amenities in their fields. In spring sport, we did come up with and in spring sports, we were a little concerned when we looked at it, although we didn't get to present the data, that there was some access inequities. And one thing that was mentioned on our committee, we're not necessarily here to offer recommendations, but we'll just say a few. We were concerned about Sawyer Field. Sawyer Field is a regulation soccer field not being used by varsity athletes. And you know, there isn't another option if we wanted to increase access for that and putting lights there, and then it would have a lighted softball field, which would make it more equitable with the boys baseball, bleachers and a bathroom. So you'd have that regulation soccer field as well as more equity for the girls in softball. They had bleachers too, people could go enjoy their games. So it strikes me as that was kind of one of the things we talked about, many different things, the Tenney grandstands and just a lot of stuff. I won't go into all of it, but I think one thing that just came out was like, there may be interest in broadening the conversation if we were thinking about equity. Good?
Thank you. What nice charts and graphs with circles on the arrows and back of each one. It's going to put the ad hoc health committee to shame. That would be me. So equity, I guess I will give a broad brush. You all got my, and Thomas helped me with this, the long sort of explanation. So there's a lot of different areas of concern with artificial turf that have come up over time. One of the issues is heavy metal exposure. So let me step back. Artificial turf, the kind that we're looking at particularly, is plastic blades that look like grass, and then there's some infill to cushion it and to help that grass stay standing up straight. And the fill of choice, the fill that's predominantly used now is crumb rubber, which is tires that are either frozen and shattered or ground up that would have been landfilled or whatever. It's a way to recycle tires, and you spread this out, and so whatever was in those tires is in the crumb rubber infill. So that has been the cause. If you Google crumb rubber infill, you will get many, many hits. There's been some concern about that. One of the concerns has been heavy metal exposure. There's been a lot of work done on this, and then pretty recently it was found that all the results people got changed when you heat the crumb rubber to 60 degrees Celsius, which is like 150 Fahrenheit or so. And so those tests are now being redone, And it's one of the reasons why the EPA, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, and the Consumer Product Safety Commission is in the middle of a large study looking at all these things, trying to fill in all the gaps, and that study has not been completed yet. So we're kind of in the middle. We're trying to look at what there is for data and really waiting for this very, very large scale. They did the first gap analysis of the data that they still need, and now they're going forward, and they've done part 1 of the study. Part 2 is coming out sometime. Neither of these are a risk assessment. They're just looking at the materials in there. But some of the things they've found is that there is zinc and lead in crumb rubber. Lead is the one that we'd be most concerned about for our students. I think if we are going forward with crumb rubber, we really should, and Chris has mentioned you can get a certification that the crumb rubber would be lead-free. Windham County's been identified as an area of high lead concern for the state by the EPA, so that would be our recommendation on that. If we were going forward with crumb rubber, it should be lead-free for our students. Zinc, I think, is more of a concern for aquatic life. So that would be a concern for if it leached out into the water and went into the Connecticut River. That's where the zinc would be of concern. There are carcinogens in crumb rubber, and I think it's important to note that crumb rubber varies from time to time. So it depends on what is in the tires that got ground up, maybe from where in the country the tires came from, who made them. There has been no long-term study on that has, there's been one study in Washington State that with soccer goalies, because the goalies are likely to put their face into it and get more exposure. And there was no, it was not a super large scale study, it wasn't a long-term study, it wasn't an epidemiological study, but that study indicated that there was no difference in the cancer rate of soccer goalies in Washington State than the general population. That said, there are many carcinogens in the crumb rubber, and the EPA, CDC, and CPSC is studying the amount of exposure and how these toxins are leached. The one area that we do have epidemiological data, the gold standard of data for medical research, is the risk of lower leg injuries. And so when you look at the overall injury rate on turf versus grass, it's the same with the exception of lower leg injuries, so ACL, knee injuries, things like that. The thought is that that the grass part is stickier, so athletes are turning, especially in football, if they're turning, they're more likely to strain because the synthetic turf doesn't give up on a cleat the way natural grass would. And the injury increase was between 16 and 24%. And it appeared from the research in Division II football players that the younger, less experienced players had a higher rate of lower leg injuries. So that's the only significant difference, but that is a significant difference for students, because an ACL is not a good, an ACL or a knee injury in a student is not a great thing to have. It seemed to be more prevalent in football than soccer too, based on our research. Would that be? The other area we looked at was MRSA infections, because turf has more friction, as I noted earlier. It's more likely to give turf burns. And so the concern is that MRSA is in locker rooms, it's everywhere. And so it's a concern. There's not been any large-scale studies on MRSA. There was one study in Connecticut of an outbreak of MRSA, and they looked where many players had it, so it was a great opportunity to look what happened in this one situation. And in this one situation, you had a 7 times higher rate of MRSA infection if you had been practicing on turf than grass. But that's a very small scale study, so I just want to caution that, but there's not that much data out there on that. And the only other health concern that we had was increased risk of heat stroke, that it can be hotter, on a sunny day, because the crumb feels darker and holds heat in a different way. Temperatures can routinely get up to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. And it was an interesting article I read that one of the considerations, which is why I put it in here, is that you use the wet bulb globe. Did I say that right? that it's more important to actually use the equipment on synthetic turf when determining field playability because there's modeling you can do, but it's not always accurate. So if we go forward with crumb rubber, we should have a really solid policy of using actual measurements on turf. It's more critical if you're deciding that with artificial turf. So that was our really nerdy review. I included in here people that are nerdier than I am about medicine and the Children's Environmental Health Center at Mount Sinai, the hospital Mount Sinai, medical school at Mount Sinai recommends a moratorium on artificial turf from recycled rubber tires until more evidence is available. They also included tips for safer play on artificial turf surfaces, which I included in the report in case we go forward with this, that we use the best practices that the medical professionals have recommended, such as clean cuts and abrasions immediately, brush your hair after play, clean your shoes, shower immediately after playing, always wear shoes on the turf, and make sure young children aren't ingesting it, so things like that. So if we go forward, I just want to make sure that we, don't adjust your mouth guard when you have turf. When you're a soccer player and you dive for the ball, or when you're a football player, it was interesting. I was at a party Saturday night, and a footballer was saying, I hate turf because I got my face dug into and I had a mouthful of turf. So a mouthful of crumb rubber infill. So I think it sounds crazy not to eat it, but there I was with a fabulous young man who had eaten a mouthful of turf. So he seemed okay, though. Did I get all the high points, Thomas?
I think a thing to bring up with the heat exposure is that, just to reiterate the fact that heat stroke has been fatal in football players, high school football players. It's not a joke. It's not even heat exhaustion. It's heat stroke. It can be fatal.
Right.
And this increases heat significantly, and not as an issue with health, but with increased heat can possibly be increased amounts of cancellations and a lack of access to the field because it won't be as usable if it is so hot.
So I just want to say that there, with the exception of the leg injury, there's not really long-term studies. I mean, those take years to complete. You have to put 500 athletes. The best study would be to tell them that they aren't playing on artificial turf and natural grass. That would be a double-blind study, but good luck with that. But you put 500 students for 10 years and you follow them 30 years. Some only play on artificial turf, natural grass, or you go back and you look and you compare. None of that work's been done. So these are just risk assessments on all the other materials and trying to take it to the laboratory, figure out what the risk level is, and determine if it's meeting a level that is concerned for human exposure. And that work is in the midst of being done right now. And I wish I had a chart and graph for you all.
That's a good question. Yes. So, Thomas, I'm just wondering what you said about access due to heat. I know, for example, like kids playing on the playground, if it gets below a certain temperature, there's like a rule that they are not allowed to go outside for recess. Did you come across anything, and Christina too, but you mentioned it, where it said you weren't allowed to play on a field if it was a certain temperature?
Well, we were talking about the heat globe. What was it called?
The wet bulb globe. Maybe Mr. Sawyer, maybe we could phone a friend and Mr. Sawyer could get, because it's not just it's humidity and the wind.
I included, so yes, in Vermont we have a heat and a cold policy. So a heat policy takes a look at the humidity and the temperature, and yes, you should use the wet bulb for accurate statement, especially on turf, but you would measure turf about 4 feet higher than the actual surface. Whereas with grass, you wouldn't, but turf should be measured about 4 feet higher. Like we do know that turf averages in Vermont about 10 to 12 degrees higher than the air temperature. So Vermont, heat stroke's a real thing. Kids do die. So whether it's grass or synthetic turf, when we see it's a humid day out and it's hot out, we measure our grass fields, and we've canceled practices, I think maybe twice this year, or we moved practices to early morning at 6 a.m., like usually in August preseason, or at 8 o'clock. So those are things we do. If we had a turf field there would probably be maybe a couple more days where it would be hotter. We would move those practices. Like again, for games, we usually play night games anyways, but we'd move those to a grass field on the days we needed to, or we might have to cancel the practices just like we regularly do. And all the athletic trainers in Vermont and other New England states have said the hours they gain by having the turf field in the colder months of November and March more than make up for the 1 or 2 days they might lose during the warmer months.
What's the temperature though? What's the temperature that you're measuring? Like
So I don't have that on me. If the temperature and the humidity hits, I think 89.1, that's considered excessive. On excessive days, you just can't practice. If it's a high warning, we might be able to practice for 1 hour, and every 15 to 20 minutes, we have to take a 5-minute break. So we can practice 1 hour with 3 or 4 water breaks with no equipment. Then there's a degree down from that. Maybe we can practice for 1.5 hours, but we can't condition. So there's different, I can send you the policy. So the Vermont Principals Association, and again, they have a hot and cold policy that the entire state follows.
Any other questions on health from the board?
I do. Yeah. Is there any way to cool down the turf? I mean, if it's at a certain, is there?
So what is done, and Chris can jump in if I'm misspeaking, what's often done is you pour water all over it, but it only lasts for 20 minutes to cool it down. So
it's not very long lasting.
It's not very long lasting in general. So
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think most people at turf fields say it's not worth wasting the water resource on cooling a field down because it doesn't happen. So again, common sense, hydrating the athletes and just being aware of the temperature and really paying attention to that. That's the main thing. We wouldn't waste water trying to cool a field down.
plus you'd be 20 minutes into it, you might have to stop
And then
playing
right
to
back
water
up.
down a
Yeah.
field. I mean, that's
Doesn't
not
really
optimal
work.
conditions for playing any sport, I would think. Good question. Climate change, you want to share what you,
We did that. Right, I can do it again.
oh, you did already? Oh,
Yeah, I mean.
We might just, mention it in this context.
sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, because you did under committee reports? Gotcha. Okay, and I missed that, sorry.
I can
My
bring up the
apologies.
exact notes, but
Okay.
Basically, the proposed field is made out of plastic, which is, I should have this in front of me. Fossil fuels are used for the creation of it. Natural grass sod is traps carbon, lets off oxygen, and then there's the concern with if we had the artificial turf, it would have to be disposed of probably in 8 to 12 years, and then new material made out of fossil fuels would have to be again purchased. That's the gist of it.
Thank you. Thanks for catching me up, sorry. So, is there a motion, or was there any other information anybody needs, or anything anybody wants from any committee that we feel we don't have? I guess is my first question. Okay. Are there,
It depends on what we're going to be deciding on, I guess.
right, I guess it depends on the motion, but if somebody says,
Yeah.
wait a minute, can't even talk about this because I don't even have a sense of whatever, then that's one option. Then I would guess I would ask if there is a motion.
I have an idea.
There will be, we won't vote until public comments.
Yeah, I think well, we've been looking at this for a long time, and with the things that we've found and other things we've heard from the public all through this time, we're still going to need, if we did install an artificial field, we'd still need to make a large investment at Sawyer Field to bring it up to gender equity standards. We'd still have to make that up. It wouldn't solve all of our problems, particularly the equity ones. There are clear environmental issues, clear climate issues, even if we didn't use crumb rubber. The lower leg injury data is solid. It's not really something that you can deny. The carcinogens are harder to track, but carcinogens are cumulative. They don't you don't get cancer quickly from exposure to them. It's over a long period of time, so there's no way to know that except that they are carcinogens. The infections are issues, the heat is an issue. Mount Sinai asking for a moratorium certainly indicates that there's reputable people concerned about it. I think it's, I think we should consider looking at looking at other ways to solve the problems that have been identified. And I know they're, well, we've talked a lot about it, but I think we should consider what actually Mr. Perrin mentioned in the Finance Committee meeting about pursuing an independent review of the fields we control, and a longer-term feasibility study about how to meet the needs that we have. I think one thing that would be important about that, and I could make that as a motion, but one of the things that would be important about that is to identify what are the problems. We know about we can't do anything about the extended season, that depends on the weather. But as far as equity, quality playing fields, or access, or enough practice time, and all the other issues, we can look at other options for that. We do have 4 fields that we own, plus a practice field. And unfortunately, nighttime darkness in the fall is an issue, but we moved the school day an hour later, so we shortened the practice times after school. And this is one of the consequences. Having lights on more fields would make that easier. But I think we should look at the proposal to get an independent review of the fields and look for a long-term feasibility study after we identify what we see as the issues, like gender balance, lights, facilities, upgrading grass, things like that. Yeah, I think that's kind of my sense. You want to make a motion to that?
Can you make a motion? So for Wendy, that was a long motion for Wendy.
Yeah, okay. Well, I move that the board either have the Programmatic and Performance Equity Committee or the administration. It really doesn't matter. We should probably talk about, since equity is a big part of it, we may want to play a role in that, but to, let's see, to pursue an independent review of the fields we control and a long-term feasibility study for natural turf.
Is there a second on that motion? Thank you for the motion.
I'll second.
Thank you, Kelly. Discussion from the board. Yeah, you're gonna have to wait a while, folks. Okay.
We made it 6 weeks for a chance to talk about it.
I know, finally we get to talk. So I will take comments from the public. We had a full public comment section last time. If you spoke and used your 2 to 3 minutes last time, again, I respectfully ask that you limit your time tonight to like 30 seconds, please, because I would like this not to go till midnight. If you did not speak last time, I want to make sure people have an opportunity to be heard.
It's going to be difficult to know with time 30 seconds.
Okay, we'll give them a minute. We'll give them a minute. We'll give them a minute. We'll give them a minute.
So I will hold up one finger after your 1 minute is done, so then be done.
Your pointer, okay?
I don't have my belt.
So, Mr. Dimes, please state your name, address. Let me just go through the ground rules quickly. I was not here at the beginning. Sorry. When you stand if you're able, it's a little bit easier for people to hear you in the room. State your name, address your comments to me. Please avoid personal attacks. We're all been working very hard and very tired. So please try to speak with respect to the board members and to other people in the room. And with that, I kick off with you.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My name is Kurt Dimes. I live in Brattleboro. I think there was a missed opportunity by the subcommittees to present relevant data. The budget share per sport might have been considered. I understand from a friend that her friend's sons were state champions 2 years in a row in Nordic skiing, yet they got not 1 cent to support their sport. In a broader view, I think maybe non-intramural sports, that is intramural sports, like touch football, would be safer and cheaper We wouldn't have to pay insurance. I think Mr. Rucker could confirm we'd probably pay $1 million of insurance because of the heavy contact sports. And there's also another thing that's unrepresented here, education. Exercise, we all know, is good for education, but intramural sports and uniforms are not. They do not have any extra benefit to education. So our students would be well served to just have plenty of exercise. They don't need a football team, a soccer team, and so forth. But that can be organized by the State Recreation Department at Gibson-Aiken Center. Thank you.
I will yield the floor to Mr. Karen for his 2 minutes.
I don't need 2 minutes. I just want to refute the assertion that Nordic is an unfunded sport. That is a false statement. It's a fully funded varsity sport. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dunn.
Yes, I'd first like to address the comment that what we're looking for is an opportunity for students. And some of that opportunity is the benefit of sports. I think you can find a number of students who have taken sports at the high school level and parlay that into good opportunities for further education in secondary schools. I'd question the existing motion as it was phrased just to deal with a natural turf field. I think you have to compare apples to oranges. If you're going to have an independent study, it shouldn't be just of natural turf. It should be natural turf and artificial turf. And also I'd question, and ask Mr. Sawyer can respond to this, why is this independent study different than the one that has already been done? Mr. Sawyer's, in his statement, the 2-page statement that was given to the board, he details that this has already been done. I'd also question with respect to the equity and use aspects, understanding what the additional hours of use of the field would be. As to health, there was no discussion of alternative fill. There are fills other than chrome rubber. Those were discussed by Mr. Sawyer and priced out, and those can substantially decrease the issues with respect to health. And I'll leave it at that.
I will say that it was included in the report that they didn't have any data on the alternative infills, particularly about the health effects, so I did not include, there's no research on them. Like, so there's some concern about some of the encapsulated, so there's no research on that to say there's very little research on the chrome rubber. One would think that, I agree, Mr. Dunn, but there was, in terms of a research review, there is really almost no research on these fairly new infill surfaces, so, but I did include that in the written report, but just didn't touch on it, no data.
And that includes, the natural?
That includes the natural, yeah. There was some possible concerns with that as well. I can't, like dust or something, I don't quite remember, but there haven't been any tests on it. Yes. Don't get me talking about research, David. We'll be here all night. It was fascinating. But I mean, one would think they were less toxic, and yes, I agree with you in principle on that. But that there was no research one way or the other for me to stand on, so it was not included here.
Hi, my name is Jeff Stent from Brattleboro, and this is to address, it's not actually to address an opinion on artificial versus sod or any of that stuff. It's to just kind of lay out some facts to address this gentleman's thoughts about having the public vote on it. The reality is the public has voted on this on June 12th, and the intent of the public at that point in time, which is actually pretty well documented in the Reformer. Well, at that time, the intent was for the public and the previous board, before this board took over, to proceed with and fund an artificial turf. And that's indicated in June 25th, first annual meeting, Southeast School District first annual meeting, where Dick DeGray referred to the artificial turf that had, quote unquote, had been previously approved at the June 12th special district meeting. And the June 26th Brattleboro Reformer states the budgeting included a quote unquote installing the synthetic turf. in the June 27th Finance Committee meeting, where the committee authorized to transfer up to $500,000 from the general operating fund to the capital reserve fund, pending the final accounting close of the fiscal year of, for the BUHS district. So my question is first to Dr. Rucker. That $500,000, was that specifically for a synthetic turf field?
So, your time is up and the questions are addressed to me, so.
He's on the Finance Committee and he's the one
I
who...
appreciate-
Okay, was it or not? Because it was.
If the board wants that question answered, I can have that question answered.
Oh my God.
So, so that meeting was June 27, and of course the fiscal year ends June 30th. And notice the minutes, as you correctly referred to, said up to 500,000. As we closed the books, that was an optimistic, but it was not expected it'd be 500,000. It turned out to be a $200,000 fiscal year end surplus that was transferred to the capital fund. That 200,000 was for the capital reserve fund, and as it stated, the several projects, you can see that on the website, you can see it in the annual report that was published for the BUHS district. It was not specifically earmarked for the turf field. It was for all of the projects that were identified in the capital fund.
Including the turf field?
Including the turf field.
Including the synthetic turf field?
Yes, including
Okay, so,
the field.
I'm sorry, we don't,
Okay,
excuse
wait,
me.
hold on.
No, I'm
No.
sorry,
Article 5B
excuse me, you're out of
says you
order.
can't do this.
You used up more than your time. I've had your question answered. You were beyond time when I stopped you. I allowed your question to be answered. We're moving on to the next person, because if I change the rules for you, I change them for everyone.
Well, you already changed them for people. You said if it's relevant. You already changed them for other people. You can't not change them for me.
I had a board vote on the change to allow somebody to speak earlier because I thought they couldn't stay.
Right, so...
So moving on, who else would like to speak?
Wait a minute. This is the law. You guys are breaking the law. You're breaking the law. Knowingly and willingly breaking the law.
I have allowed comment. You were allowed comment at the last meeting. I gave you the time that everybody, he had his finger up and you continued to speak. I had your question answered. You are continuing to delay the meeting. You are out of order.
Can we just have a point of clarification from the press?
Yes.
The motion that we both reported was for necessary capital improvements to the recreational field.
Yes, that was my recollection of the vote that night, to authorize a loan of up to $750,000 for necessary improvements to the recreational field.
Can I just ask that the motion, according to what we reported and what we have on tape, did not include either the words artificial or synthetic. Is that correct?
To my knowledge, that's correct. If anybody has other knowledge, please let me know.
Later in the meeting.
Next.
Press is all set? Thank you.
Marilyn Carroll of Brattleboro. I just have a question about a couple of the presentations. On equity, the charts, I wonder if you had any idea of the number of hours of use per field were in use. And as some of you know, at the last meeting I presented that in Springfield, Massachusetts, they're using natural grass very intensively with many different sports. So I don't know that it's really an equity issue. Chemical fertilizer would not be used with the natural grass, hopefully. Organically managed will give you a much deeper root system. And one thing that I think was lacking in the health report was the newest, most recent indication that PFAS are found in artificial turf. And those are cumulative. And
Thank you. As a point of clarity, it was in my report. There's not a lot of data about levels or risk assessments because that came out on my birthday, so it's relatively new, such as my old age is as well. So there is not any research about the levels, so I did not include it. Obviously, it's concerning.
Should I respond to the plate?
If you have a quick answer, or you could send it. I mean, you could probably do it offline.
Yeah, I can do it offline.
Chris has a comment.
Mr. Sawyer.
Well, just to clarify, just the equity report, there's a lot of good data there. Thanks for presenting it that way. To be clear, right now there's 9 football games being played on that field. There would be 7 girls soccer, 7 boys soccer, and 14 field hockey games. So girls soccer would be played on that field. You had mentioned JV teams don't play. The reason we don't play varsity games at Sawyer Field is if we did that, we'd lose 2 teams would have to cancel practice every time we had a game because we'd lose practice spots because we don't have enough fields. So that's why we play night soccer games, not because we love staying all night, but it's one way to fit a practice in before games. Yeah, actually, Sawyer Field right now does have bleachers for softball. Tenny Field does not have bleachers for baseball. So they're there, they're just unusable, but that would clarify. So I'm just looking at the fall use, we'd get about 650 hours on Natowich Field versus the current 48 hours we're using now, and all our fields are